Darcy, I'd love to welcome you to my podcast. Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed. And Darcy Baxter is with us today. She is a minister from the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Stanislaus County. And in completing my goal of seasons of life, everybody that will eventually show up on this podcast is from a different season in life. And most importantly, for this episode, I really wanted to have a unique perspective on joy and a an understanding of a concept that not everybody has even heard of. And so I invited Darcy today to talk to us about joy as an act of resistance. So I would love it if you would first start by defining that and what that looks like.
Well, that's not a phrase that is mine. And I think from my own research, it's actually a phrase that comes from the poet Toy Derricott. And she has actually a series of poems, and that is a line featured in one of her poems. And then she cited it when in 2016 after the 2016 election. She cited it in a talk she gave, which is how I first came across it, and then I did some more digging. And she is a African American poet and professor, I think at Pittsburgh. And her poem, I actually want to look up the exact phrase because this question about particularly in times when there is so much horror going on, really bad things, like how and why should one feel joy? She has this poem and she writes these series of poems about her goldfish and it's called Telly
Oh.
the Fish. And there's these series of poems about it and talks about how she just loves her goldfish so much and she pays someone to take care of the goldfish when she's away. And a friend says, well, why are you paying someone that much money to take care of your goldfish? It would probably just be cheaper to flush the goldfish down the toilet than pay someone to take care of it. But she was just deeply attached to the goldfish. And she's like, what does it mean? Why does this goldfish mean so much to me when I have ancestors at the bottom of the ocean? And she's just really grappling with this contrast of joy and, and this awfulness, both in life and in her ancestors. She
Mm.
never explains it. And that's where as far as I know, she first uses this line, joy is an act of resistance. And there's something so moving to me. And I really resonate with she's an accomplished professor woman and she loves her goldfish so much. And that's just I find that so compelling and speaks to something about we're such weird creatures and where we find that sense of joy, connection, aliveness, to grab hold of it, even though it makes
Yes.
absolutely no old sense, right? It makes no sense to spend the money to someone take care of your goldfish, but it's
Mhm.
that goldfish that really matters to her.
Right.
And I think there's also something to me about when she's talking about goldfish, there's also I thinking about bubbles or whatever keeps you buoyant is this other thing that
Mhm.
comes to mind. And that I think is a key piece about joy is in order to keep on keeping on through all the hard stuff, some sense of buoyancy that keeps you literally your head above water.
Right.
Uh, and that it is a means almost of survival. And I know I have known people, right, who can be doing things, but they lack a quality of vitality and aliveness. That's really sad.
Mhm.
And that
You
sense of aliveness is really
Right.
important.
Would you agree with the statement that most of us do that at some points in our life for survival, right? It's like they're the drudgery of just the day to day. I talk a lot on this podcast about, just the robotic nature that life can take and being on autopilot. And I'm told my story, running companies, being a single parent, and you don't lean into the thought about joy or about anything other than the present moment oftentimes. I was lucky I did it because I did it with my daughter and was able to be present for the joy there. But it almost is the antithesis to joy, and being present is almost the antithesis to the robotic automation that we find so many of us find ourselves in day-to-day life, right?
Yeah, and I don't think that is by accident,
Mm,
um, in terms of, the economic system we live in. People who have a sense of aliveness and vitality don't take things lying down, right? Like that there's a desire to have people not give up, give a fight.
mhm.
So that there's really structures in place and that can impel us and push us on these kind of ways of being and what it means to resist that and to find a quality of being. And it's hard because there's so many forces on all of us that are
Yeah,
not supporting that journey.
I agree. I agree. So how do we do that then? Like, how do we, for those of us that are more activist based, it seems like it would be like a way of being an activist, right? Like, I'm going to feel joy and I'm going to be present for joy because we need to, and it is not something that is coming easily, and it's not part of the system, right?
Mhm. I think it gets tricky because in dominant society, so much of the model we have for living is this a model of consumption, right? Or commodity that what we think of as pleasure is, a warm bath, which can be, but it's experiences that can still be like achieved, um, that you and consumed in this way. And for me, I think of joy as something that's not exactly controllable. There's like conditions of that make it likely, but it's not exactly something I can will into being. Like I can put myself in a situation, I've done dance classes, right? I've done dance classes for like 20 years. And I don't exactly have control. Like it is a practice of mine that I do the dance classes no matter what I feel. And they're more likely to bring me into a state of joy. But I don't exactly control that. Like sometimes that's not the experience I have. I get
Mm,
some good
yeah.
exercise, but there's other times that that it is. And so for me, there's a practice to what are the things, a kind of practice that is likely to bring about these conditions, but also accepting it's not something like, here's my joy hour, like it's definitely going to happen. um, yeah, that there's quality of aliveness. It doesn't fit into a kind of consumer or commodity model. Yeah. So that it's for you say, I mean, I feel like I'd have to have a lot of hubris to be like, this is how you do it. I do paying attention to what brings you like
Mhm.
aliveness,
Mhm.
and then is there a way on a somewhat regular basis that you can create those conditions, right? Is it,
Mhm.
sometimes you go out to lunch with a friend and it pops and it has energy, and sometimes it's just, and I think assuming you can hit it every time, but that regular lunch date with a friend might then end up bringing you joy, even though it's not popping and like that energy every single time.
Mhm. Yeah. And I feel like joy doesn't always feel the same or look the same, right?
Well,
Like for me, it is being sure to be present so that when you start feeling joy, that you hang on to it as long as you can, right? And you
mm,
file that away in the category in your brain that, oh, this was a great thing and it's a memory I want to keep. And I want
yep.
to be reminded that when I start to have this feeling or this experience again, that it's potentially there, right? I mean, I
Mm,
think part of the challenge with, in addition to the robotic nature of our lifestyles oftentimes, is just the presence to notice it and not just like, oh my God, that was great, and then like skim right past it,
mhm,
like especially with those of us that have kids, especially when they're little and those moments
mm,
hit and you realize the entire room of adults are sitting around in a circle staring at this child who just did something cute or funny or whatever, and everybody is feeling joyful in that moment. That's just one example, but I think noticing it and being present. It's almost like a Polaroid. Right? You want to take a Polaroid picture of it, but you want to be able
mm,
to hang on to it too, right?
mhm. Right, and being able to be present requires a certain kind of attention that it allows one to maybe slow down a little bit, and that can be hard because the to-do lists and the nature of the economy we find ourselves in is just like cramming and, having to get so much done. And, so like that's, say like how to do that. And it feels again, oh, how do you slow down? And I don't really know. Like I know that that's, I think, part of it, and trying to find the places of agency you have in your life.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then there's, I think there's also times where there's not, and that it's not an individual fault, because life circumstances can be that hard and people do have to work
Yes.
that much and do that much hustling,
Yes.
that it's not a personal fault that, oh my, I'm not finding joy in my life right now. And I was like, I don't, that that is the system we find ourselves in for so many people.
Mhm.
And there might be spaces you can maneuver, but it's a lot. Um,
Agreed.
yeah.
Agreed. So why do you feel like it's important for people to understand, all of us to understand, or some of us to understand anyway, the nature of the resistance? Because some people would see, might seem that that feels like they're contraindicated, right? Like resistance and joy.
Yep. Yep. Well, and it's interesting. I came across Toy Derricott's work, and it was, I guess it was in 2017? Yeah, because she gave an award to the Cave Canem Society it was right after the 2016 election. And actually it's popping up. This Joy's Active Resistance is popping up on memes now. And there was an NPR podcast that talked about this. That was because people are actually posting images of like, something of Joy's an active resistance. And this woman's like, is all joy an active resistance? Or like, where's the, like, what are you resisting? Or just, how is joy not denial of the hard realities? Like, how can it be a way that fuels you to engage with the hard realities and keeps you going,
Mm.
rather than checking out?
Yes.
Checking
Yes.
out. And she really just wrestles with this question of how it's gotten really popular in social media. And she talks about, particularly, the line comes from this African American woman, and then like, what does it mean when like white women are posting about, their creme brulee and their espresso, and like, is that what Toy Derricotte really meant? um and so I think, for me, that like the joys of active resistance is dependent on a broader context that you find yourself in, and where you're devoting your energies. Who are you caring for? What is it energizing you to do? And so
Mm.
it's an act of resistance when all of the various forces and structures we find ourselves in that are making people hustle way too hard and work too hard, while there are some people with obscene amounts of wealth, you know what I mean, that there's
Mm.
that disparity. What I feel like it's if your life, and broadly understood, the way you're trying to nurture something that doesn't feed in to these systems and forces that exploit people, that lead to so much inequality. I think that's a key piece of
Mhm.
that phrase. And given, I think, how Toy Derricotte uses it in this poetry about Telly her goldfish, it's really explicit about, wow, there is so much awful suffering in the world. And there's a real engagement with that, rather than like, woohoo, like,
Right.
I'm just going to
Right.
say checked out and just
Right.
really avoid
Right.
that. So there's an engagement with how
Mhm.
bad and hard it is for so many people.
Well, and that's one of the things too that I want to make sure we always talk about in these episodes too, is it's not a toxic positivity, it's
Oh
not
gosh, yeah.
anything like that, or toxic spirituality, or that's not the point of it at all. And it's
Yep.
the, like you said, the energy you get from joy in resistance is probably a little bit different than your joy when you're not feeling so heavy and weighed down by such challenges, right? And it
Yep.
energizes you in a different way, right?
Mm,
Because I think of the various levels of privilege that we have. And I think about feeling joyful and energetic in a way that helps me go to work at my third of three jobs so that I can have food on the table for my family is a very different space than feeling joy because I'm sitting in a wine bar with my friend post massage. Children are in daycare or they're grown
Yeah.
or they're, wherever they are. It's a very different scenario. And that is very true in this. It's a true always, but it's magnified right now in our lives. And I think, it's just important, I think, to call out the differences and to know that it can also help you fuel you in your activism in this time, right? Even if that is, if you get joy from that, if you get energy from being a part of something that is leading towards, or you're fighting for rights for people. I think it's important to have that energy in those moments. And when you are in situations while you're standing up for people, with yourself, others, etc.
Well, and I think that when you talk about social justice struggles and the, fights for liberation, and those are, right, generations, right?
Mm,
Those are not things that are were you necessary in different periods, you might experience more like
mm,
wins,
mm,
right? And I think for folks that identify,
mm,
like, we came from an era, I think about like gay marriage, first black president, there was this sense, it's like those were really concrete.
mm.
Um, and but there's periods where you don't have those concrete wins, but you still need to keep on, right?
Yes.
Like still contribute. And how do you keep doing that? Particularly when there's not going to be a piece of legislation or, there's something really concrete. And for me, that's where I define it as like a spiritual journey. And
100%.
it was really sweet. A 17-year-old showed up at church on Sunday by himself, and he'd met some folks at a justice meeting in town and then showed up. And we were talking, and it brought to mind like early for me, he asked how long I've been doing this, like ministry stuff, and how I got into it. And it brought to mind that was it when was Bush v. Gore? Was it 2004? Yes, 2004. And I was living in the Washington D.C. area, and like Florida was a what's it called, a swing state.
Mm,
And so there were like some of these like DC nonprofits that were like, hey, if you'll go down and knock on doors like on election day, basically, like we'll fly you down and all that stuff. So I was part of this big group, and there was a lot of like young white like college educated folks, and that spent a few days knocking on doors. And then the evening of the election, like we were getting on like a midnight flight, and it wasn't looking good. And there was a sense of like despair and like despondency. And I just remember thinking of like, we're mostly white folks, we're college educated, we have this level of privilege. And there was this like sense of despair. And I was like, where's the like, man, this is hard, but let's sing a song and keep on going. And that was like a really pivotal moment about like what spirituality meant and how to encounter those times when it's a big loss.
mm,
And, I think for me, part of like the joy and resistance, right, it can be meaningful and so alive in those relationships where you're doing that. Like it's meaningful, it's purposeful, and the time you get to spend with some of those people, regardless of the outcome, is where I find for me like the joy in that. So I just hadn't thought of that story in a while, but that was like pivotal for me about
mm,
it, like this is bad, like this is whatever, this is bad and hard, but like, why aren't we singing? All these like white gynecologist going on. I'm like, we're not gonna be as impacted by this as a lot of other folks are
mm,
gonna be impacted by this. And so
mm,
that was a really shaping moment for me.
mm. Interesting.
Can I read
Yeah.
this poem?
Yes, please.
Okay. So it's a poem by Toy Derricott on the reasons I loved Telly the fish. Why would I say I was pathetic when talking about my life? Why would I think of it as little, my little life, I said, as if looking back at what kept me alive, what I constructed to make my own success, to regard that with tenderness and understanding as something even sweet and marvelous, was insane. Then maybe I began to love Telly, really nothing in the grand scheme of things. The way that lady, when I told her that I paid $100 a month for someone to come in and feed Telly when I was away, said, "But Toy, how much did Telly cost? $1.98? Then why not just flush him every time and get another?" Whatever I said to myself, whatever I felt and did, that kind of care was silly, nice, but well, crazy. The way when you grow up and understand the great things, a fish's life is nothing, as if, and probably they can't think or feel, there are much more important things to do, think about, to love, and dedicate ourselves to. There are doctors, great poets. There is fine furniture, clothes, children, true love, God, for God's sake. There is everything to remember, everything to be worried and concerned about, as if I could find it if I just kept looking. Something really real out there, just outside of what I could take in. And this was how I stayed alive.
Joy is found in small things, even in $1.99 goldfish.
Yeah. And the kind of the nonsensicalness. And I think that's hard because we're in, we manage things, we try to plan things, we figure things out, we invest in our reason. But what does it mean to listen to ourselves?
Mm.
In that there was something so powerful in her relationship that was a source of aliveness. And even though it didn't make any sense, and I think, I think about like the importance of paying attention to our lives and the things that don't make sense
Right.
and yet lure us anyways towards something.
Agreed. And it's just another example of trying to attach monetary value to things, right? It's like if it's all about, if you want get joy from this fish, just toss in and get a new one every time. You'd save $98 a month. But it's more than that. I mean, and this is
Yeah.
a very clear example of an exchange of money for joy. Like why would you get rid of something that brought you so much joy?
Hmm. Yep. Right. It's not, uh, but it didn't make sense to anybody else. Like, why would anyone love a goldfish like
Right,
that?
right.
Which is, like how to
Hmm.
have such a fierce, when it makes sense to nobody else.
Mhm.
And, there even could be derision from it of like, that doesn't
Yes.
make any sense. But when you can feel that, this word I keep using is like aliveness, that is kind of a synonym. When I think about joy, it's
Right.
this a certain quality of aliveness that it brings you.
Yeah, that's a key point to lean into the joy even when nobody else can understand it, or maybe even especially when no one else can understand it because it's not
Yeah.
about anybody else.
Yeah. It's something that is like paying attention to that still small voice. For me, there's kind of a way that aliveness is almost kind of not quite an exact synonym for joy. In the still small voice within, is
Mhm.
there's a sense of needing to tune in to something different. It might not, that doesn't make sense, that's not rational, but there's a kind of uh a weirdness or otherness to it, and like listening to that and pursuing it even when it doesn't make any sense, but
Mhm.
it's a quality, there's a different feeling quality to it.
Mhm.
And we're just taught, it should be logical and we should be reasonable, and so you don't pursue the things that don't fit into that
Right.
paradigm.
Yes.
But following, there's different sources of wisdom, and trying to listen to that. And for me, when I think about joy and aliveness, it's it's tuned into this like different register, or a different kind of source or voice or something.
Hmm. I love that. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for finding that poem too. I think it'll be good for our listeners to be able to hear the poem as well so they can relate back to what
There's a
you're.
whole series. She has like 3 series. It's
Oh,
too much. So
awesome.
but to look up Toy Derricotte and her Telly the Goldfish poems.
Awesome. I'm gonna write that down so then I can look that up and link it. Awesome. Okay, so let's move into the final three. And we will start with one that I always ask too soon, and I have to stop myself because I want to wrap it at the end. Do you make it a point to feel joy even a little each and every day? And if so, how?
Maybe sometimes. I think what I say is I have practices, like my dance classes are really important to me, and that's not every day, but I do it with enough
Mm,
frequency. And again, I don't necessarily get that sense of aliveness every single time, but it is increases the likelihood of
mm,
it. So I have practices or try to have some conditions that I know can open me to that sense. It doesn't work every single time,
mhm.
um, but it does enough. And yeah, so I think I have regular structure to access that state. Not that I can always do it or reach it.
Right. Awesome. Thank you. And I think that's all that we can aspire to, right? It's like it's not nothing is guaranteed and certainly not a joyful moment, right?
Yeah.
We can only do what we know can potentially evoke it or be present for it when it shows up surprisingly.
Yeah. And right, there's times in my life when it's easier to do that or pay attention, and then there's times that it's harder.
Yes.
And I try not to like be one that kind of like bad me, I am not feeling joy, and more like a tenderness, like, oh, right now things are a bit harder, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Tenderness and gentleness is
Mm,
if I can't find the joy, try to find some gentleness and
mm.
tenderness.
I love that. And that's so important for everybody to hear that. Thank you. The next one is if joy were a live energy and was whispering something to you today, what would she say?
You know what's funny comes to my mind is it wouldn't be words, it would be like a drum beat. It would be like a
Mm.
rhythm. But, you know
Because it gets you moving. Look at that. She
yeah,
gets
right,
you
like,
moving.
it's a beckoning, it's like inviting so that
I love
it wouldn't
that.
be words, it wouldn't be
I love
words.
that.
Yeah.
And that's important to remember too, because music, regardless of whether you dance or not, but it changes your energy oftentimes if the conditions are right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think for me, right, like sometimes what is being whispered, like you say, like whispered or something, like it's not always words too, right? Like it's listening, it's a different kind of listening. You're paying attention and it doesn't always come in words.
I love that. I love that. All righty. If you could leave one message with my listeners today, what would that be?
We want to say like it's not all on you. You are doing the best you can. And I really hope to think of treating yourself with gentleness and tenderness when you're not doing the things maybe that you think you should be doing. And I have found in my own life that a kind of posture of gentleness and tenderness has helped me transform and more likely to like soften to the world. And like if I, find qualities of joy and aliveness, I don't get it through like shaming myself to be like, get to it. You didn't get to that. You skipped your dance class. So I think, yeah, I think that would be an ending message is it's not all on you. I think you're probably doing the best you can. Um, and what would it mean to treat yourself with some real gentleness and tenderness?
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for that. And I think that if people took only one thing away from this episode, that would be it.
Mm,
Because we don't get taught how to be tender or gentle with ourselves. We
yeah,
get taught to be tender and gentle with others, but not ourselves. And even when we're feeling joy, sometimes we can circumvent it in a heartbeat by saying, oh, nope, can't do that right now. Like the house is on fire, the kids are this, and my job is on, got this crisis going on. And the tenderness and gentleness, wow,
yeah.
mic drop. So thank you so much for joining me today. And I enjoyed this. I love it. It's a different perspective than we've heard, and it's a lot deeper. And I encourage people to really listen in with an open mind and an open heart. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Leah. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you.